Hello and welcome to Cutting Through. I'm Mitchell Plitnick. There's a new controversy taking place in the Democratic primaries, and unsurprisingly, it's happening in Michigan, where one of the candidates, Abdul El-Sayed, has been pushing forth a progressive and populist message, which we know the Democratic establishment really hates, and they will look for any reason to blast that person. So I've already talked a bit about part of the controversy where Syed went on Twitch streamer Hassan Piker's show and has been seen in public with him and will not disavow Piker, and he's right not to do so. Piker is a streamer. He is a young man, relatively young man. His profession is to say very bold, sometimes shocking things, and that's going to get you in trouble in politics. That's the way that is. That's why Hassan Piker is a streamer and not a politician. Uh, this is the way of the world. So everyone wants to sort of, at least everyone in the Democratic Party wants to sort of run away from those things and run away uh, for the purposes really of trying to marginalize a progressive voice. This is, the old guard of the Democratic Party loses and loses and loses some more, and yet they still cling to this losing vision. Syed is supposed to be unelectable, as they say. That's the argument. It's the same argument that's being used in Maine against Graham Plattner. Except when you look at the polls, every poll not only shows Plattner trouncing the establishment candidate Janet Mills, but also doing much better against the sitting Senator Susan Collins than Mills would. And yet they continue to argue electability. That is still Mills's big selling point. It's don't let the facts get in the way of a good pitch, basically. Abdul El-Sayed told CNN, and I'm quoting him here, I think there's this notion that electability is about being the least offensive. If that were true, why would Donald Trump have won the presidency twice? Hey, guess what, folks? That's a really good point, isn't it? And I don't want people to get the impression that I'm advocating, and I don't think El-Sayed is advocating that the Democrats be more like Donald Trump. It's simply a matter of strategy. This idea that that you say something and everybody clutches their pearls, gets all upset, and they're never going to vote for that person. Sorry, that's just not the way it is. That's not realistic. It's not what happens. There are things that are policy questions that make people not vote for a candidate. We saw that happen in 2024 with Kamala Harris, who refused to distance herself from the genocide in Gaza, and not only that, refused to treat Palestinians as people, essentially. Refused to recognize their humanity, marginalizing them so much that the most moderate Palestinian voice was forbidden from speaking at the Democratic National Convention. And guess what? She lost. Um, and of course, Abdul El-Sayed is a progressive, and he is somebody who is definitely anti-Zionist. He is anti-AIPAC. He has called Benjamin Netanyahu a war criminal, referred to Israel's military campaign in Gaza after the Hamas's October 7th attacks as a genocide. Where's the lie? There isn't one. In calling that a genocide, he is agreeing with every reputable genocide scholar, including many Holocaust historians, including basically that industry. The world's leading organization of genocide scholars agrees with that point. Israeli genocide scholars agree with that point. But in the United States, we're still pretending that that's a debatable issue. It is not. Israel is in denial. Most Israelis are in denial. That is true. Nobody else around the world is. That's where it ends. In my view, Abdul El-Sayed is eminently electable. Um, those who argue otherwise simply don't have a basis for that argument. He's attracted a strong base of support, and he brings out voters in Michigan that have been alienated by Kamala Harris and the incumbent Haley Stevens. Let's remember who Haley Stevens is. Haley Stevens is somebody who ran as a pro-Israel candidate against another pro-Israel candidate, Andy Levin. This is a man who wears his Jewishness on his sleeve, very clearly pro-Israel, but he's also pro-two-state solution, doesn't like AIPAC, doesn't like Netanyahu, but he does like Israel. Now, I would argue that somebody like that is exactly the person that, if you're pro-Israel, you should be pushing, because Netanyahu and AIPAC are leading Israel off a cliff instead of to some place where Israelis can find some accommodation with Palestinians. Who knows after the genocide, what would even be possible? But we still see, look and see how much play people like the two activists, Mao Zedong, the Israeli whose parents were killed on October 7th, and Aziz Abu Sara, his friend, a Palestinian, who has lost family members also to Israel, and they go around and talk, along with the organization Combatants for Peace, which is a wonderful organization. I've had the privilege of hosting some of their speakers at events over the years. These are people who have suffered the worst things you could suffer, the loss of their children in some cases. And they still say, in the memory of their loved ones, that the killing should stop and that a reasonable accommodation needs to be found that addresses everybody's rights. That's who people should be supporting. It's actually, by the way, what Abdul El-Sayed believes, from what I have seen. It's certainly what Andy Levin believed, but it wasn't good enough for AIPAC and Haley Stevens. Um, how then the Democratic Party has pivoted is to go to Mallory McMorrow. Mallory McMorrow compared Hassan Piker to Nick Fuentes. Now, come on. I mean, it doesn't take much to see how absurd that is. There's a lot of stuff out there talking about how, you know, Hassan Piker uses what is called misogynistic language. You know, he'll use the word bitch all the time. Listen, I got a Gen Z kid. I see a lot of Gen Z folks who are very left, sometimes so left that they're very narrow-minded as leftists. They haven't, in many cases they're reactionary leftists, but they're very left, and they use that word. I know women who, when they're angry at someone, say, "Suck my dick." Sounds silly to me, but I know people, not just Gen Zers. I mean, I know people who are very much feminists who say that kind of thing. Women, I'm talking here. It's a phrase. It's the kind of thing that gets said. Anyway, the framing of Hassan Piker is its own issue. But in any case, these are not the things that Abdul El-Sayed had said. He stands, this is a man who is in the healthcare industry and has written a book on Medicare for all. This is a man who embraces progressive politics and therefore can win. Um, one of the things I tweeted to Mallory McMorrow when she made this contemptible um, uh, uh, comparison, I wrote, when the real issue of anti-Semitism is used cynically to protect Israeli war crimes, that's bad enough. For you to use it for your own crass political gains is worse. It all endangers Jews everywhere, which I have no doubt makes no difference to you. But it's even a plus, and maybe it's even a plus in your book. In either case, every Jew of conscience and any Jew with a sense of self-preservation should join me in condemning your reckless hate. The idea that El-Sayed is unelectable is ridiculous. Okay. Um, and it's also been very clear that the Piker Association hasn't worked, right? It has not worked. So they're trying something else now. So Abdul El-Sayed was asked in an interview, if he saw Israel as evil as being as evil as Hamas. And he said, yes, killing tens of thousands of people makes you pretty damn evil. It's not how evil is this one versus that one. Hamas evil, Israeli government evil. You can say both. Where again, where's the lie? And where's the ethical dilemma here? Where's the problem with this? Only if you deny the actions of Israel that are plain before our face and have been for many years to anyone who wanted to look, can you argue with that point? Israel has targeted civilians on many occasions long before October 7th, 2023. Many, many, many occasions. The practice of the double tap that had finally got some attention in Gaza. That's something Israel's been doing for decades. It's not new. Israel has systematically destroyed Palestinian civil society over the years. They've targeted it. It hasn't been a mistake. Okay, they're especially Netanyahu has made no bones about the fact that he wanted to destroy the ability of Palestinians to create a state of their own. He wanted to preempt that possibility. He has said this. It's not a secret. And he has been Israel's longest serving prime minister. I would argue, and I can certainly make a strong case, that other Israeli prime ministers were doing the same. No Israeli prime minister has ever truly committed officially to a Palestinian state. Yitzhak Rabin, which people think he did not. That was not the agreement he made. That was not what the Oslo Accords said. Ariel Sharon, in his Gaza withdrawal, was not trying to create a Palestinian state. His own top aide said the idea was to put the peace process into a deep freeze. That was the point of the withdrawal. So, we need to deal on some level with reality. But I also do want to deal with this question of the language that Abdul El-Sayed used. I personally am not interested in this good versus evil concept. When we talk about these issues, especially when innocent people are getting killed and there's a lot of violence and destruction, everyone wants there to be the good guys and the bad guys. It's not the way of the world. The oppressed are oppressed. Not the good guys, they're just oppressed and they're acting out of that. Oppressors are oppressors. Clearly, nobody's going to call them the good guys, except many people think they are. You know, um, it doesn't do anyone any good. This is old, old stuff. It harkens back to concepts like, the notion of just war theory, which gets taken. I don't think it's entirely a false theory, but I think it gets taken to this place where there is this concept that you can wage war in a just way. That is not true. There is no such thing as a side in in an armed conflict that has not committed war crimes. It's never happened. It doesn't happen. Whichever side you think are the good guys, it doesn't happen. There are always war criminals among them. There are always war crimes among them. It always, always happens without fail. It is the nature of violence that it makes people act in even more violent ways. There's no, oh, I only do this, to the extent that I have to. Sure, some people feel that way, but when you take 1,000 people, let alone 10,000, 100,000, 500,000 soldiers, combatants of any kind, and throw them into that fray, you're going to have a significant percentage that don't have that restraint or for whom the restraint is stripped away by the violence they're engaging in. That's the way of humanity. And that is why opposing war is so important. It's not cliche and it's not trite. There is no way to have good wars. There is no way to do it. No one ever has, no one ever will. People say, well, what about World War II? Well, what about World War II? We could talk about the carpet bombing of Dresden. We could talk about the biggest crime there, which was, of course, the dropping of the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which was defended by saying if we didn't kill hundreds of thousands of Japanese civilians, we might have lost tens of thousands of American soldiers. There's something very wrong with that calculus. That's not how it works. And yes, we can blame Japanese leadership also for not recognizing when they had lost and just calling it a day. Sure. But there are no good guys in any of this. That's in terms of states. When we talk about resistance fighters, that's again, there is this romantic notion that resistance fighters can carefully pick and choose their targets to only hit military targets. That's what international law tells them to do. It's nonsense. It's not how resistance can possibly operate, because the resistance fighters simply don't have the means to do that, and don't have the tactical ability to do it. If they try to be that careful, they will lose. That's why they don't behave that way. And these things, it's funny because when you have incidents happen and then time passes, they get seen very differently. Think about, for example, the Nat Turner's slave revolt. Howard Zinn, in A People's History of the United States, described the slave revolt this way. Turner gathered about 70 slaves who went on a rampage from plantation to plantation, murdering at least 55 men, women, and children. And there are sources that say the number was higher than that. And the murders happened with what is reportedly pretty extreme brutality. But Nat Turner is recognized as somebody who turned the tide of history with that revolt. Does that justify those actions? It's not a question of justifying the actions. That's not what anybody does. You don't justify killing children. You can never justify it. But this is what happens when people are enslaved and they have to revolt. That's what you take on when you want to enslave people, or in another context, when you want to occupy them, when you want to take away their basic rights. This is what people will turn to. This is what they have to turn to. These are the wages that you have bought for yourself by taking those actions. We can look at another example in 1622, that when, after years of tensions and failure of numerous attempts by the indigenous people there, the Powhatan, to find some accommodation with European colonists who had settled in Jamestown, Virginia, the Powhatans attacked numerous points of the colony. They killed 347 people, which was a huge percentage of the colony's entire population. And the colonizers responded with brutal genocidal war against the Powhatan, taking a dreadful toll on not only them, but on all the tribes in the area, driving a lot of them off and severely diminishing their populations. The colonizers justify this by saying this was an unprovoked attack. This was an atrocity, but it shows the bestial nature of the native people here, and why we have to come and civilize this land. Blah blah blah, because there wasn't a war going on at the time. There was back and forth happening, but what was happening was that the Europeans, the colonizers, were launching incursions into Powhatan territory. They were seizing land. They were committing terrible acts of violence, including kidnapping and murder, taking women away, and it had become finally intolerable. And the indigenous people responded. It took them a long time. It took them years to respond. That was going on for quite a while. But the colonizers said, much as the slave owners faced with the Nat Turner's revolt said, 200 years later, that this just shows the savage nature of those people of color. But history obviously has rendered a very different judgment. It doesn't change the fact that these are terrible acts. If you want to talk about evil, it's all evil. Killing innocent people, killing people who may be of those people that are oppressing you, but are not themselves doing the oppressing. That is wrong. It is evil. It is terrible that it has to happen, but it will happen when people are oppressed. colonization, slavery, the measures that oppress people, have taken in response. It's all evil. And we can say, well, but this is more evil than that. And my answer is going to be, so what? It's all bad and it needs to all stop. So to bring it back to this question that El-Sayed was asked, is Israel evil? Look, people, and I'll be honest, in much of the anti-Zionist discourse that I see, Israel is presented as somehow uniquely evil. Now, Israel is in a unique situation. When we talk about colonial states, very few colonial states are built on the idea that the colonizers are reclaiming land that was taken from them. So that's one difference. That is the driving mythos of Zionism. There are other differences, and I think bigger ones. There is rarely, if ever, I can't think of a historical parallel for a country that gets support from much greater powers all over the world, including the world's greatest military superpower. But also, we talk Europe and even countries that don't necessarily love Israel and may criticize its behavior still have no problem doing business with it, like China. Israel is enabled in everything it does. It never pays penalties. BDS was set up specifically because countries were not holding Israel to account. That's why it exists. That's why that movement happened. So, so there are certainly unique circumstances. But when we look at the genocide in Gaza, and it is absolutely a genocide in Gaza, we make it out like, how could this happen? This is the worst thing ever. It's never, well, unfortunately, I hate to tell everyone, there's been plenty of genocides and there's other ones going on right now. We could just look at Sudan and what's happened there. There is a genocide happening right now in Sudan. We know of historical genocides in recent years that the world turned a blind eye to, whether it's in Rwanda, Somalia. It took 100 years for some of the Western world to acknowledge the Armenian genocide. And let's not lose sight of the fact that, I'm sitting here in the United States. This is a country that was built on a massive genocide, a genocide of unprecedented proportions across this entire land. And we were not the only ones who committed genocide. The African slave trade, I would argue, can be seen as a form of genocide, certainly in certain areas of Africa. I don't love the idea that somehow Israel is supposed to be worse. And it's a problem because the enabler of Israel is the United States, and we need to change American policy in order to stop Israel. It's the only way Israel will ever stop is if the United States changes its policy. And yes, there is an ethical tightrope here to walk. And I think it's important that we always acknowledge that we're talking about a country that has committed more war crimes than any other in history, and I ain't talking Israel. Okay, it's the United States that has devastated countries all over the world on every continent. The number of war crimes on the American ledger, and it's nothing. It's not ancient history. It's the stuff we have been doing and continue to do. Our hands are not at all clean, and it is not because of Israel. I think, one of the biggest problems that I see with this Joe Kent guy, yeah, I'm glad that he called out Trump for this war on Iran, but when he talks about, basically lists everything the U.S. does wrong and says it was all for Israel, that is not true. The United States is genocidal all by itself, and we were doing it long before Israel came around. None of that changes what Israel has done and what Israel continues to do. And it has to stop. And somebody like Abdul El-Sayed is the kind of person who wants to stop it. Now, if he wins the Michigan primary, and as the last poll I saw had him neck and neck with McMorrow and Stevens being behind both of them, um, Michigan's a battleground state. It's no sure thing he'll beat the Republican. There's a reason that we call Michigan the battleground state. There's a reason Trump won it. You know, if we can talk about the issue of Gaza and how that hurt Kamala Harris in Michigan, and it did. It pretty much destroyed her, but it couldn't have done that if it wasn't already very close, if that wasn't a battleground state. It didn't cost her where I live in Maryland. I could happily not vote for her over the genocide. Had I lived in Virginia, had I lived in Pennsylvania, two states that border on the state I live in, I would have voted for Kamala Harris. I would have hated it, but I would have done it because it would have mattered. I don't have to do it because I live in Maryland. It's the way our elections work. But if this is going to stop, and I don't just mean our support of Israel, I mean this cycle of Democrats get in, do nothing, disillusion everyone, and then Republicans come in and are even more fascist than they were before, because that is what's going to happen. People somehow seem to think that, that Trump will go and Republicans will get back to something that they call normal, but this is the Republican Party now. This is what they are. Okay. The Republicans that we call normal, the ones who we think of, people like Mitt Romney or further back, the Reagan Republicans, the ones before Newt Gingrich, but all that, those people are out of the party now. They're in the Democratic Party now. There's a reason that if you look on MS now, half of their hosts are ex-Republicans. Their politics didn't change. The Republican Party did, and they're no longer comfortable in that party. And I said at the time when this was happening 10, 12, 15 years ago, that they were going to come into the Democratic Party and try to pull it to the right to make it look more like the old Republican Party, move the whole Overton window further right so that, what is called left in this country is basically Ronald Reagan. And that is actually where we're heading. People don't want that. People want change. And that's the real problem, is that the Democrats now are fighting for the status quo. And that is exactly what people do not want. Abdul El-Sayed is not the status quo. And this party, this Democratic Party, I get that the people who are at the head of the party, be it Chuck Schumer, be it Hakeem Jeffries, and I'm not just talking about their pro-Israel politics. I'm talking about their centrist, so-called moderate politics that basically defend the status quo, and that led to what I think is the least talked about, but one of the most important decisions of any president in the history of this country, certainly the recent history, which is when Barack Obama decided to address the financial crisis by bailing out the banks instead of the people. That was an anti-democrat, the party, the idea of the party. That was the wrong move. That is what's caused so much resentment now, because Obama said he was going to bring change you can believe in, and what he brought instead was the defense of Wall Street with that decision. And I think that's one thing that he has never been able to overcome. People gave it a chance to see if it would work. That's why he got elected a second time. They wanted to see, okay, you say bailing out the banks is important, that it'll help us all recover, except the banks recovered and the people didn't. So Democrats have lost that ground, and they need to take it back. Republicans are doing what Republicans do. And that's fine. You know what? That's what they believe in. They're actually, they believe in Trump. They believe the line of bullshit that he's selling them, and that's what they believe in. Okay. As we say in Yiddish, geg isn't the hate. Go in good health. That's what you do. But the Democrats are here believing in nothing and standing for nothing except the status quo, which sucks for most Americans. Most Americans do not do well with the status quo. That's why you see when you see these people with purportedly liberal politics, The ones that are punching down at progressives, at the Hassan Pikers, at the Abdul El-Sayeds, at the Ilhan Omars, at the Bernie Sanderses. The ones who are punching down at those progressives tend to surprisingly all have nice homes in the suburbs, keeping up with their mortgages. They may not be super wealthy, but they're comfortable. They can take a nice vacation now and then. They have a nice car. They're not struggling to put food on the table every month. But most Americans are. Most of the middle class is. Forget about poor and working class people. And that needs to change. And those are the people who are going to vote, I believe, for Abdul El-Sayed. Look, the way this works is actually fairly simple. There are plenty of people who are going to vote blue no matter who. And let's be honest. In 2026, in the midterms, there's going to be a lot of people who may not be thrilled with the Democratic candidate, but they're going to vote because they are so angry about Trump. But it's going to be just like 2020. You know, this all may well last till 2028 when, Trump may do more and keep that anger going. And then they may lose the White House. And then again, Biden had a Democratic Congress. He couldn't get things done. And we can whine and bitch and moan about Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. You know what? If Lyndon Johnson had had that kind of attitude, then we wouldn't have had the Civil Rights Act in 1964. He had plenty of hostile Democrats when he was trying to push that through. So, that is nonsense. The president can make those things happen. Biden didn't want to. That's the reality. Okay. So we're still going to have the people who will vote Democrat no matter what. We're going to have more of them in this election because of Trump. But there's also going to be plenty of what I will call, say blue no matter who on one side and red or dead on the other side. That they're going to vote Republican no matter how bad Trump screws up the country. Then there's all those people who can go either way or not vote at all. You have to get those people to vote and you have to get them to vote for Democrats. How do you do that? Well, in 1996 and 1992, when Bill Clinton was running and people were still enamored of Reaganomics and just thought, George H.W. Bush had bad luck with the economic downturn and certain things, and maybe he just wasn't as good as Reagan, blah, blah, blah. They still were buying into that sort of thing. You wanted to bring in the conservatives. That was right 30 years ago. It was the right move. It's not 30 years ago anymore. A lot has happened since then. It's just not good tactics anymore. It is not a good strategy. It is a loser. It has been losing. If Democrats would actually give people health care, would actually give people jobs that pay well, would actually create an economy where the overwhelming majority of people can pay their rent or their mortgage, can put food on the table and pay their bills. I'm not talking about living large. Okay. This country can do that for all of its citizens. People know that without going completely socialist. I think it'd be better if we did, but that's a different debate. This country has the resources to do that. Okay, instead of spending $1 trillion or $1.5 trillion on the military, we can do those things, and that is what people like El-Sayed, people like Zoran Mamdani, people like Bernie Sanders, people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, et cetera, that's what those people are pushing for. And that sells. Those people are winning. They're winning everywhere you look. I'm not going to say they're going to win every district. They're not. They're not going to win every senatorial race. Different places in this country have different sensibilities. Of course, you have to think about that. But the idea that if the place is contested, that the better bet is to go conservative is dead wrong. That is political suicide. It's been proven over and over. Just because a place is a battleground state doesn't mean you need to go conservative and take no risk. Quite the opposite. If it's a battleground state, you need to show people why you're going to be bold and make change. That's what wins. That's what makes Bernie so popular. It's why Zoran Mamdani is the mayor of New York City now. And that's where Democrats need to go. Get over this bullshit about what words Abdul El-Sayed is using, because we all know where Israel stands among Democrats and among a growing number of Republicans too. And the ones that don't agree, those independents or Republicans who still see Israel in this bright light as this light unto the nations, they're not voting Democrat in any case. Those are the right-leaning independents that are going to vote Republican. You're not going to sway them without losing the Democratic base that you lost in 2024. So get it through your head, Democrats. This is how you win. And better than that, it's more than how you win. It's how you govern, and it's how you make this a better country and a better world. This isn't just politics. This isn't just winning and losing. This is also what's right. And I'll leave it there. If you found this video of value, please like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. If you can support the work of Cutting Through, and we can continue bringing you this kind of analysis. There's some new stuff being planned. It would be really great. You go to mitchellplitnick.substack.com. You can subscribe to Cutting Through. You can become a paid or free subscriber. But if you become a paid subscriber, you're helping support this work. And that would be very, very deeply appreciated, especially in these very, very difficult and trying times. So I leave it at that, and I will talk to you soon.